An old black man named Samuel, dressed in worn-out, ragged clothes, walks slowly into a busy city bank. His coat is patched, his shoes worn through. Everyone glances at him, some with pity, some with suspicion. Two bank employees, Lisa and David, notice him immediately. Their faces tighten. They whisper to each other. Lisa, looks like another panhandler. What's he doing here? David, probably wants to scam or cause trouble. Samuel approaches the counter with a gentle smile, holding a small folded letter. He asks quietly, "Good morning. I'd like to withdraw some money, just enough to buy my grandson a birthday gift." Lisa rolls her eyes. David crosses his arms, stepping in front of Samuel. Without warning, they shove him roughly. Samuel stumbles and falls. Shocked customers watch as Lisa grabs a nearby bucket of dirty water and splashes it over Samuel. Samuel sits drenched silent as everyone looks on, some horrified, others amused. But then Samuel slowly stands. Calmly, he pulls out his bank card and a statement showing he is the bank's largest depositor. His voice steady. "I'm here to withdraw my entire balance." Watch until the end to see how one act of kindness or cruelty can change everything. Subscribe for more stories that challenge what you think you know. Comment if you've ever been judged wrongly or witnessed injustice. The morning sun peeked through the cracks of a weathered wooden fence, casting slanted shadows across the cracked sidewalk where Samuel's feet shuffled softly. The old man didn't move fast, but he never hurried either. He carried a quiet dignity beneath the worn-out jacket patched in places by careful hands, the kind that's stitched with love and a story behind every thread. Samuel was no stranger to the hard miles life had thrown at him. At 72, the creases on his face told stories of joy and struggle, hope and hardship, woven like a tapestry nobody asked to see. But they were there, clear as the early light cutting through the city's noise. This morning, like every morning, he woke in a small apartment on the third floor of a building that had seen better decades. The windows rattled with the wind, and the walls bore the scars of years, paint peeling, pipes groaning. But it was home, and that mattered. Samuel's routine was simple but sacred. A small breakfast of black coffee and buttered toast, a glance at the worn photo of his grandson tucked in a frame on the windowsill, and a slow walk to the bank downtown. Today, like many days before, he carried a small, tattered wallet and a letter he'd folded 100 times over. Most people walking those streets never gave him a second thought, a ghost among the busy, a figure in threadbare clothes no one stopped to ask about. But Samuel was a man who lived quietly, his story hidden in plain sight. "People see what they want," Samuel often said, eyes twinkling when he shared wisdom with his few trusted friends. But what they don't see is the life behind the clothes. Born and raised in a small southern town, Samuel had learned early what it meant to work with his hands and stand tall in a world that too often tried to push him down. He'd spent his youth in factories, his prime years as a hard-working mechanic, and later, a community mentor for kids growing up in neighborhoods that felt like traps. He wasn't rich by any stretch, but he was rich in the ways that mattered: respect, honesty, and an unshakable sense of purpose. Over the years, Samuel had quietly saved dollar by dollar, depositing money into that very bank's accounts. Some might have scoffed at a man dressed like him having tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, tucked away. But that was the point. He kept his life separate from the judgments others made. Samuel's real joy came from his family, especially his grandson Jamal, a bright kid with dreams bigger than their little apartment could hold. Jamal was a light that kept Samuel's fire alive. Every birthday, every holiday, Samuel planned carefully, setting aside a little from his savings to buy Jamal something special. This year was no different. As he walked towards the bank, the letter in his pocket was addressed to the bank manager, a polite request for a small withdrawal to cover a birthday gift. The amount was modest, but the gesture was priceless. Samuel entered the bank doors slowly, his cart creaking under the weight of a few personal belongings he carried daily. His clothes caught the glances of some customers, their eyes flickering with assumptions. The air smelled of polished floors, printer ink, and recycled hopes. At the counter, Anna and Mark, the two employees who had already passed judgment, exchanged looks. Anna whispered, "Here comes trouble." Mark nodded. "Bet he's here to beg or scam." Samuel's voice was calm but firm as he greeted them. "Good morning. I'm here to withdraw a little money. It's for my grandson's birthday." Instead of kindness, Samuel was met with suspicion and derision. Anna crossed her arms and barked, "Sit down. We don't serve people like you here." Mark stepped forward, blocking Samuel's path. "You think you can just walk in here and take money? We don't have time for scams." Before anyone could stop them, Anna shoved Samuel. The old man fell, steadying himself on the floor, soaked with shame and confusion. The cruelest act came next. Anna grabbed a bucket of murky water from a nearby mop bucket and poured it all over Samuel. A hush fell across the bank. Some gasped. Others averted their eyes. Samuel sat drenched, eyes steady, voice soft but full of quiet strength. Slowly, Samuel rose and reached into his worn coat pocket, pulling out his bank card and a statement showing the highest balance held in the bank. He looked Anna and Mark in the eye. "I am the bank's largest depositor. I came today to withdraw a small sum, a gift for my grandson." Mark and Anna froze. A silence filled the room. Samuel calmly told the bank manager to prepare his full withdrawal, every last dollar. News spread quickly throughout the bank and to the customers. One by one, customers lined up, inspired and stirred by Samuel's dignity and courage. The bank's cash reserves were drained. The institution that had ignored and humiliated one of its most valuable customers now faced collapse. Anna and Mark, trembling with guilt, fell to their knees before Samuel, begging for forgiveness. But Samuel, holding the same bucket of dirty water, poured it back on them. His voice rang clear. "You judge me by my clothes and my face. Now you know the cost of your blindness." He turned and walked away, a man who had won without raising his voice. Anna and Mark lost their jobs. The bank closed down. The town talked about Samuel's bravery for months. But Samuel didn't seek glory. He went home to his grandson with a simple gift and a lesson. Dignity is not defined by wealth or appearances, but by how we choose to treat each other. The day after the incident at the bank, the city felt quieter in a way that wasn't quite normal. Folks walked a little slower, eyes a little wider. Word had spread, maybe faster than Samuel had hoped, that the old man with the patched coat was no ordinary customer. Some called him a hero, others whispered about shame, but everyone talked. Samuel, however, kept his usual rhythm. He wasn't one for grand speeches or public acclaim. His life had taught him the power of silent dignity, of actions louder than any shout. He woke early as always. The apartment was modest. An old clock ticked softly in the corner, and the faint smell of brewing coffee mingled with the early spring breeze drifting through the cracked window. The photo of Jamal still sat by the window, sun-kissed and worn, just like the rest of Samuel's world. Today was different, though. Jamal's birthday was just around the corner, and Samuel had a small wrapped package tucked inside his battered satchel. Not expensive, but chosen with love and a lifetime of hope. He remembered the day he first opened an account at that very bank. A young man then, starting with a paycheck too small to fill his dreams, but big enough to build a future. Over decades, Samuel had squirreled away every spare dollar, every paycheck, every unexpected gift from life's lean years. Not because he craved wealth, but because he believed in something deeper. A cushion against life's storms, a legacy for the boy who meant the world. Samuel dressed carefully, putting on his one good shirt beneath the patched jacket. The same jacket that had earned curious glances and wary stares. But he never minded. He carried pride like armor, weathering judgment like rain. As he stepped outside, the city was waking, noises swelling. The distant hum of traffic, the rhythmic clack of heels on pavement, the occasional bark of a dog. Samuel's steps echoed softly as he made his way to the bus stop. He greeted neighbors he knew by name, nodded to the mailman, and waved to the kids chasing each other near the corner store. Every face held a story, and Samuel remembered them all. At the bank, a crowd had gathered, curious eyes, some wary, others eager. Rumors had whipped through town like wildfire. Samuel's walk to the entrance felt heavier this time, not with fear, but with the weight of unspoken expectations. Inside, the polished floors gleamed. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with that of crisp paper and freshly printed checks. The walls, painted a neutral cream, reflected the steady hum of conversation. Samuel's worn shoes clicked softly as he approached the counter where a different teller greeted him. Not Anna, not Mark, but someone new, with a gentle smile. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" she asked. Samuel returned the smile with the warmth of a man who had weathered storms and come out stronger. "I'm here to withdraw some money," he said simply, "for my grandson's birthday." The teller's eyes flickered over the worn edges of his coat, but she didn't judge. Instead, she nodded, reaching for his bank book. As the teller worked, murmurs spread through the waiting room. People who had seen Samuel's dignity that day before were now whispering of respect, of mistakes made, of the courage to stand tall when all seemed lost. Outside, Jamal waited with his mother. The boy's eyes sparkled with anticipation, clutching a handmade card tightly. This birthday wasn't about toys or games. It was about something more, something Samuel had built quietly over years. Trust, love, and the knowledge that someone believed in him. When Samuel returned with the money, he handed it carefully to Jamal's mother. "Make sure he knows how much he's loved," he said softly. Jamal looked up at his grandfather, eyes wide. "Thank you, Pop." That day, Samuel walked through the streets of the city not as a man marked by his tattered clothes, but as a symbol of perseverance, of unseen worth, and of the quiet power of kindness. Back at the apartment, Samuel sat by the window. The city buzzed below, oblivious to the small miracle of a grandfather's love and a boy's smile. He opened the card Jamal had made, the simple words inside filling him with a warmth money could never buy. But Samuel knew the road ahead was still long. The world had shown its harsh side, but it had also shown its capacity to change. His story wasn't just about him. It was about every overlooked soul, every quiet act of courage that dared to challenge the status quo. And as the sun set behind the skyline, Samuel made a promise to himself to keep walking, keep giving, and keep believing in a better tomorrow built on respect, dignity, and love. The days after the bank incident stretched out like slow rivers, each moment heavy with the weight of what had happened. Samuel didn't avoid the streets or the eyes that now lingered longer when he passed. He walked with the same calm dignity, but the world around him was different, charged, uncertain, and quietly watching. He made his way back to the old neighborhood, where the cracked sidewalks held memories as deep as the roots of the ancient oaks shading the corners. Children played in the streets, their laughter a soundtrack of hope, a reminder that life kept pressing forward no matter the pain beneath. Samuel's small apartment was humble but full of life. The walls were papered with faded photos, decades of family, friends, and moments stolen from time. And in the center of it all was a worn rocking chair, where he often sat, gazing out the window as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with fire. That evening, a knock came at his door. It was Marlene, a neighbor and lifelong friend, her eyes bright but serious. "I heard about what went down at the bank," she said softly. "People are talking. Some good, some not so good." Samuel nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's hard for folks to look past what they think they see." Marlene smiled gently. "But you showed Sam. You showed them all." Over the next weeks, Samuel found himself quietly surrounded by new faces, young men and women from the neighborhood who'd heard his story and wanted to help, to listen, to be part of something larger than themselves. They gathered in his living room, sharing food, stories, and plans for how to lift the community together. One evening, as the group was leaving, a young woman named Tasha stayed behind. "Mr. Samuel," she said, "I just want to thank you. Not for the money, but for the way you stood up. You made me believe in myself again." Samuel smiled, eyes warm. That's the kind of gift that keeps on giving. But the city was a restless place. The bank's collapse sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Local news reporters came knocking, eager for interviews, headlines, and angles. Samuel, however, stayed grounded. He wasn't a man chasing fame or fortune. He was a man focused on healing, on making sure the next generation had more chances than the last. One afternoon, while volunteering at a neighborhood center, Samuel ran into Marcus, a local journalist who had covered the bank story extensively. "You ever think about running for office, Sam?" Marcus asked. Samuel laughed softly. I leave the politics to folks with suits and speeches. I'm just here to do the work. But people need someone like you, Marcus pressed. Someone who knows what it means to fight and survive. Samuel thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, Marcus. I'm not the voice of change. I'm the quiet reminder that change is possible. The community around Samuel began to shift, small ripples turning into waves. Banks and businesses reconsidered how they treated their customers. Programs started to focus on dignity, respect, and true inclusion. But Samuel never let the praise get to him. He still shopped at the local corner store, still walked the cracked sidewalks, still carried the same worn wallet and patched jacket. Because his fight wasn't about recognition. It was about being seen, really seen, and helping others to be seen too. One chilly evening, as the sun faded and the street lights flickered on, Samuel sat on his stoop, watching the neighborhood kids run past, their laughter ringing through the air. He thought about Jamal, about the birthday gift, about the long road ahead, and he smiled, knowing that no matter how hard the journey, they were all walking it together. The morning light filtered through the half-closed blinds of Samuel's apartment, dust motes dancing lazily in the soft beams. The city outside was waking, but inside, the old man sat quietly at the kitchen table, the worn ledger open before him. He was a man who lived by numbers and stories, every deposit, every withdrawal, a chapter in the book of his life. But today, something was different. The peace that had settled after the bank incident was starting to ripple. News outlets were still buzzing, questions being asked behind closed doors. Samuel could feel eyes watching, waiting, not with suspicion this time, but with curiosity and maybe a bit of fear. The phone rang sharp, insistent. Samuel picked up. It was a voice from the bank, calm but carrying an edge he hadn't heard before. Mr. Samuel Bennett? We need to speak with you regarding your account and recent withdrawal. Samuel listened quietly as the woman explained the situation. The bank's liquidity was in jeopardy. Regulators were asking questions. Customers were panicking. The bank's survival was uncertain. He sighed softly. This was the cost of courage in a world that preferred complacency. But Samuel wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That afternoon, he walked into the bank, not as a supplicant or victim, but as a man reclaiming his dignity. The lobby buzzed with tension. Bank employees whispered, eyes flickering nervously. Samuel approached the manager's office and asked for a meeting. Inside, the bank manager, a sharp-suited man named Collins, looked up from his desk, his face tight. Mr. Bennett, Collins began carefully, we appreciate your business, but your actions have caused considerable unrest. Samuel's gaze was steady. I'm not here to apologize for standing on my own feet, but I'm here to understand how a place I trusted can fall so quickly. Collins shifted. It's complicated. The bank has obligations to its shareholders. Samuel leaned forward, and obligations to its customers, too, including the ones he chose to ignore. The conversation was tense but civil. Collins proposed a plan, a restructuring, a way to stabilize the bank by seeking additional investors and cutting back on risky ventures. Samuel listened. Then he offered an alternative. What if we build something better? Something rooted in community, transparency, and respect. Collins scoffed lightly. That's idealistic. Samuel smiled softly. Maybe, but ideals are where change begins. Word of the meeting spread fast. Community leaders and local activists reached out. They wanted to hear more about Samuel's vision. Meanwhile, Anna and Mark, the two employees who had humiliated Samuel, were facing their own reckoning. The bank's board launched an internal investigation. Both were suspended pending review. Rumors swirled that their actions might have triggered regulatory scrutiny. Samuel heard about their suspension, but chose silence. Revenge wasn't his game. Instead, he focused on what mattered: rebuilding trust. One evening, at a community forum organized by local leaders, Samuel spoke, not from a podium, but from a chair among neighbors. He shared his story: the years of saving, the quiet hope, the humiliation, and the strength found in dignity. His words were simple but powerful. We are more than what we wear, more than what they say about us. We are the stories we live and the love we give. The room was silent. Then slowly applause rippled through. Inspired, a group formed, the Community Trust Coalition. aiming to create a cooperative financial institution owned by the people for the people. Samuel became an advisor and mentor, but never the face of the movement. He believed in lifting others up, not standing above them. Back at the old apartment, Jamal's birthday arrived. The small gift Samuel had withdrawn was wrapped carefully in brown paper and tied with twine. At the party, a modest gathering of family and friends, Jamal's smile lit the room brighter than any candle. Samuel looked around, heart full. He knew the road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, hope was not just a word, it was a promise. As the city settled into night, Samuel sat by his window, watching the stars emerge. He whispered to himself, "Change comes quietly, but it comes." The weeks that followed the community forum were a blur of activity. Samuel found himself thrust into a role he hadn't sought. Not a leader, but a steady hand in a moment hungry for direction. The coalition meetings were packed with faces bright with hope and wearied by struggle. Teachers, bus drivers, store clerks, young people hungry for change. They all came, bringing stories and dreams. Samuel listened more than he spoke. But when he did talk, his voice carried the weight of a man who had lived through storms and found peace and persistence. One evening, after a long meeting in the cramped community center, a young woman named Carla approached him. She was fiery and earnest, a school counselor with a fierce belief in second chances. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "your story is what this city needs. Not because you're rich, but because you didn't let anyone tell you who you were." Samuel smiled. "Carl, it's about more than me. It's about all of us. We build each other up or we tear each other down." Carla nodded. "Then let's build." The coalition decided to start a small credit union, owned and run by the community. It was a mammoth task, securing licenses, raising funds, navigating red tape. But Samuel and the others had learned something invaluable: the power of quiet determination. Meanwhile, Anna and Mark's names haunted the corridors of the old bank. Their suspension turned permanent after an internal review revealed not only their misconduct, but also a pattern of negligence. Attempts to find new jobs were met with cold shoulders. The word spread. They had humiliated a man who had more money in the bank than the entire branch's payroll. One day, Samuel walked past the bank's shuttered doors. The faded sign still hung, a reminder of pride lost and lessons learned. He paused, touching the chipped paint lightly. "Sometimes," he murmured, "buildings fall so something stronger can rise." Back in the neighborhood, the credit union's small office buzzed with life. Samuel watched a young man open his first savings account. A mother deposited the last of her paycheck, hopeful. Children's laughter spilled from nearby playgrounds. Samuel knew the road ahead was long and winding. There would be setbacks. There would be skeptics. But the seed was planted. One rainy afternoon, as Samuel helped repaint a faded community mural, Jamal ran up, muddy and smiling. "Pop, Pop, look," he said, holding a small painted rock. Samuel chuckled. "That's beautiful, Jamal. Just like you." Jamal's eyes sparkled. "I want to help build more, like you." Samuel ruffled his grandson's hair. "You already do." Later that night, Samuel sat alone on his stoop, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. He thought about the journey, the humiliation, the courage, the slow, steady reclaiming of respect. A neighbor's voice called out, breaking the silence. "You changed this place, Samuel." He smiled softly. "We changed it together." And as the cool night wrapped around him, Samuel understood something profound. Lasting change isn't loud. It's patient. It's relentless. It's carried in the hearts of those who refuse to be invisible. Because sometimes the greatest battles are fought not in courtrooms or headlines, but in the quiet moments when one person chooses to stand up, even when no one's watching. The air was thick with tension that morning in the newly opened Community Trust Credit Union. It was a far cry from the polished, cold bank that had once dismissed Samuel with scorn. Here, warmth filled every corner, from the chatter of neighbors greeting one another to the nervous smiles of first-time account holders. Samuel moved through the crowd quietly, a humble figure among hopeful faces. Though the credit union was young and small, its purpose was vast: to restore faith where it had been shattered, to build community where isolation had ruled. But as much as the community embraced the change, the outside world wasn't ready to let go so easily. The old bank's closure had triggered ripples of economic worry. Regulators and investors watched closely, skeptical of a grassroots movement daring to challenge established systems. And then came the backlash. One morning, Samuel received a call from a city official. The voice was clipped professional, but with an unmistakable edge. "Mr. Bennett, there are concerns about the financial practices of your credit union. We need to conduct a review to ensure compliance." Samuel listened calmly. Of course, transparency is the foundation of everything we do. Behind closed doors, the review became an inquiry. Documents were scrutinized, transactions questioned. Rumors began to spread. Whispers that the credit union was unstable, that Samuel's past made him unfit to lead. The news reached the local media. Headlines appeared. Community credit union faces scrutiny amid financial concerns. Op-eds debated whether this movement was a genuine solution or a risky experiment. Meanwhile, Anna and Mark, the disgraced former bank employees, surfaced in the background. Though no longer employed, their names popped up in murmurings and anonymous tips, insinuating mismanagement and impropriety within the new institution. It was a subtle campaign to undermine the progress Samuel and the community had fought so hard for. But Samuel refused to be rattled. At a public meeting called by the city council, he stood before a packed room. Faces of supporters, skeptics, and curious onlookers filled the seats. "Look around," Samuel began, his voice steady. "These are not just numbers on a balance sheet. These are neighbors, families, lives rebuilt from the ground up." He shared detailed records, open books, and testimonials. The community spoke, a chorus of voices telling stories of hope restored, of opportunities created where none existed before. The opposition pushed back, questioning every detail, every decision. But Samuel didn't waver. He knew the power of truth, not just spoken, but lived. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the scrutiny began to lift. Regulators found no wrongdoing. The credit union was stable, growing, and a beacon of what could be achieved when people believed in each other. Yet the fight took a toll. Samuel's health faltered briefly, the weight of the battle pressing on his shoulders. Friends rallied around him, and Jamal, now growing into a thoughtful young man, took on more responsibilities in the community. One evening, as the sun set golden over the city skyline, Samuel and Jamal sat on the stoop of their apartment. "You've done so much, Pop," Jamal said quietly. "Do you ever get tired?" Samuel chuckled softly. "Son, the work of a lifetime isn't about never getting tired. It's about never quitting." Jamal smiled, eyes bright. "I want to keep going. For you. For us." And in that moment, Samuel felt a peace that only comes from knowing the next generation is ready to carry the torch. Because the story wasn't just about one man in a tattered jacket. It was about a community rising, about dignity reclaimed, about hope made real. And that was a story worth telling, again and again. The turning point didn't come with a bang. It didn't flood the streets or shake the city hall. It came quietly, almost unnoticed. A single unedited video uploaded by a teenager named Mia, a young woman who'd once stood on the edges of the very neighborhoods Samuel had fought to uplift. Mia's video was raw. No fancy editing, no dramatic music. Just a handheld phone capturing Samuel in the community garden, patiently teaching a group of kids how to plant seedlings, how to nurture growth from dirt and hope. Her caption read simply, "This is what real leadership looks like." The video exploded online. Thousands watched, shared, and commented. People who had only heard rumors about Samuel now saw the man behind the story, the man who rolled up his sleeves and dug in with his community, who showed up day after day without seeking applause. News outlets picked it up. The narrative began to shift. Stories poured in, neighbors sharing moments when Samuel had quietly helped fix a roof, bought groceries for a struggling family, or simply listened when no one else would. Meanwhile, the system that had tried to silence him began to unravel. Documents leaked, revealing that the old bank had ignored warnings for years. Complaints about mismanagement had been dismissed. The very employees who had humiliated Samuel were revealed to have a history of unethical behavior and bias. At city council meetings, voices once skeptical turned to remorse. Officials apologized publicly for the failures that had allowed injustice to flourish. Anna and Mark, the two employees who had poured water on Samuel and called him names, found themselves cornered. Their defense crumbled under the weight of evidence and growing public outrage. They were fired, blacklisted, and their attempts to find work elsewhere were met with silence or rejection. But the real change wasn't just in policies or public apologies. It was in people. At local schools, teachers began incorporating lessons on dignity, equity, and the power of standing up for what's right. Youth programs flourished. Neighborhoods, once fractured, now held block parties and community cleanups. Samuel watched these changes unfold not from the front lines, but from a garden. He still tended the soil, still greeted every kid by name, still nurtured seedlings and hopes alike. One afternoon, Jamal sat beside him on a freshly built bench. "Pop, pop," Jamal said. "People are finally seeing you the way I always have." Samuel smiled, eyes crinkling. "Sometimes, son, it takes a while for the world to catch up with the truth." Jamal looked out over the garden, then back at his grandfather. "I want to keep fighting. For us. For everyone." Samuel nodded slowly. "And you will, because you carry more than my name. You carry our story." That night, Samuel sat by the window, the city lights twinkling below. He thought about the long road, the shame, the struggle, the slow, steady rise. He whispered softly, "The fight isn't over, but neither am I." And in the quiet, a new hope took root, one that would grow long after he was gone. The collapse wasn't sudden. It didn't crash through the city with sirens or smoke. It was a slow, steady unraveling, like a thread pulled from a worn sweater until the whole thing started to fall apart. The bank, once a pillar of the community, was no more. Its doors shut, its offices emptied, the old signage peeling in the sun. Inside, the echoes of judgment and ignorance seemed to linger like ghosts. But outside, a new kind of energy was building, one rooted in resilience, in the people who refused to be invisible any longer. Samuel watched it all from the modest porch of his apartment, where the hum of the city mingled with the laughter of children playing in the street. He had no grand plans for glory. His victories were quiet, measured in the smiles of neighbors and the soft earth turned by new hands. The Community Trust Credit Union had blossomed. Small but fierce, it stood as a testament to what could be built when dignity was the foundation, not profit. Yet the real collapse was in the systems and attitudes that had allowed people like Anna and Mark to thrive. When they lost their jobs, they weren't just punished for their actions. They became symbols of a failure that ran deep. They tried to rebuild their lives elsewhere, but their reputations followed them like shadows. No one trusted the names that once spat on Samuel. The community's refusal to accept them was not vengeance, but justice. A collective stand that said, "We will not tolerate this again." At the same time, policies changed. New oversight committees formed. Transparency became more than a buzzword, and community voices gained seats at tables where decisions were made. In schools, lessons were rewritten to include stories of dignity and courage, of quiet heroes like Samuel who changed the world without fanfare. One day, Samuel received a letter. It was from the mayor's office, inviting him to speak at a citywide event celebrating community resilience. He accepted, but only because he wanted to honor the people who had stood with him. The neighbors, the children, the everyday heroes, standing on the stage under the bright lights and before a sea of faces. Samuel spoke not of himself, but of hope. "We are more than what they say," he said. "More than the clothes we wear or the money in our pockets. We are the heart of this city, the soul of our streets. And as long as we stand together, no force can erase us." The crowd erupted in applause, but Samuel didn't smile widely. His victory was quiet, humble. Later, as he walked back to his neighborhood, he passed the garden where it all began. Children were planting seeds, their hands dirty and bright with possibility. He knelt beside a young girl, showing her how to pat the soil gently. "This," he whispered, "is where change starts, with care, with patience, with love." The sun dipped low, casting golden light over the city. Samuel looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of years and the lightness of dreams. His journey had been long and hard, marked by struggle and triumph. But it was far from over, because some stories don't end. They grow. The days stretched long after Samuel's speech, but the weight that had once pressed heavy on his shoulders began to lift. Not because the world suddenly changed overnight, but because the people around him started to see differently. They saw past the threadbare jacket and the worn shoes. They saw a man whose strength was quieter, but no less fierce. Yet, reckoning has a way of calling those who once turned away. One by one, familiar faces from the past began to reappear, not all to apologize, some merely to confront the truths they had buried. The first was Mrs. Wilkins, the old tenant manager from Samuel's building. She wasn't one for grand gestures. She came quietly, knocking softly on his door one afternoon. Her eyes held a weariness that hadn't been there before. "Samuel," she said simply, "I want to say I was wrong. I saw you as less than you are. I didn't ask, didn't listen. And for that, I'm sorry." Samuel regarded her with calm eyes. It takes courage to admit that. "Thank you." Her visit wasn't about forgiveness, nor was it about seeking it. It was about facing the truth. And that Samuel knew was the beginning. Next came Mr. Harris, the father of the boy who had once withdrawn trust from Samuel under pressure a month ago. The man arrived on a rainy morning, his coat soaked but his resolve clear. They met on the back porch of Samuel's apartment. Mr. Harris spoke with a voice heavy with regret. "I was scared," he said. "I thought I was protecting my son by doubting you. But all I did was push away the help he needed." Samuel listened, not judging, but understanding. "We all have fears," he replied. "The important part is what we do after." Others followed. Teachers who'd once called students difficult and disruptive, parents who'd stayed silent, afraid to challenge the status quo. They came to confess, to acknowledge the cracks in the system they'd once supported. Samuel welcomed them not as judge, but as witness. Some visits were quiet, some tearful, some brief. But each one chipped away at the walls built by years of neglect and fear. Yet, not everyone returned. Some voices remained silent, their absence a reminder that reckoning doesn't guarantee reconciliation. One afternoon, a soft knock interrupted Samuel's quiet moment in the garden. He opened the door to find Craig, the landlord who'd evicted him without warning. Craig looked older, worn by time and regret. "I've heard about what you built," Craig said, voice low. "And I want to say, I was wrong. I treated people like inventory. You showed me what I missed." Samuel didn't smile. Acknowledging it is the first step. Craig nodded, eyes honest. "But I don't know how to fix what I broke." "Start where it hurts most," Samuel said. "And don't expect perfection." Craig left that day changed, not by words, but by the weight of a quiet truth. The reckoning wasn't tidy. It wasn't neat, but it was real. And that's what mattered. Samuel's notebook filled with moments, not names. Stories of people who'd faced themselves and chosen better. At the bottom of the last page, he wrote, "They came back. Not all but enough." The city was quiet that morning, the streets bathed in the soft gold of early light. Samuel stood at the corner of 6th and Rowan, where the old bus stop had once been a place of loneliness and judgment. The bench was new now, sturdy and freshly painted, and a small garden bloomed beside it, tended by hands Samuel had never met. He didn't come back for nostalgia, nor for praise. He came to mark a moment, not an end, but a pause. 1 year since the day he stepped into that bank, drenched and humiliated, only to walk out a quiet symbol of resilience and dignity. He pulled from his bag a fresh notebook, its pages blank, waiting to be filled with new stories. He opened it and wrote at the top, "This is not a beginning. This is where I pause." No one waited for him at the stop. No crowd, no cameras, just the city waking, the hum of distant traffic, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring. Across the street, a woman waved. Samuel nodded back. He didn't know her, and she didn't know him. But in that simple gesture was a connection, the invisible thread that binds community. He did announce that he was stepping back. The work had grown too large for one man. Margaret and the coalition had blossomed into a movement. New leaders stepped forward, young, fierce, and ready. The garden, the credit union, the neighborhood programs. They no longer needed just Samuel's hands. They needed a family. He still visited Harold's store on Fridays, sometimes helped Francis on the porch of the Hale estate, but less out of obligation and more out of joy. Because when you survive, you get to choose how to give. The night before he left his apartment for the last time, Margaret brought him a small box. Inside was the first note he'd ever given her, the one he'd tucked away when the world had been darker. "Noah B., if you ever need help again." Beside it lay his old notebook, now bound in soft leather, its pages worn and filled with stories of struggle and triumph. "I thought you might want this," Margaret said softly. Samuel held it, a weight and a treasure. "I don't need it anymore," he said. "I remember now." The next morning, the apartment was quiet, peaceful. He packed lightly, a coat, a bag, the new notebook. Margaret didn't cry or make speeches. She placed her hands on his shoulders and said, "They will try to shrink you again, to remind you who you were." Samuel looked at her and believed her. "But I've seen who I became." He walked through the apartment one last time, past the rooms he'd fixed, the kitchen where he learned to make tea, the porch he painted with love. He closed the door gently behind him and stepped into the city. The streets no longer ignored him. They greeted him. He passed the garden where kids planted spinach and the apartment building where he'd once slept on the steps. He stopped at a small, empty plot by the train tracks, light filtering softly through the trees. No sign, no fanfare, just a few garden beds, already filled with earth and hope. Samuel rolled up his sleeves and began to clear weeds. Because when you plant something real, you keep tending it, even when no one's watching. Later, at the bus stop, a child walked by with his mother. "Who fixed this?" he asked, pointing to the sturdy bench. The mother smiled. "I don't know." But nearby, a passerby said, "A boy who didn't want anything, except for people to be seen." Noam smiled quietly and walked on. No ceremony, no spotlight, just a bench that held more than weight, just a garden that promised growth, just a man who built something that didn't need permission to last. As he left, he whispered to himself, "They tried to erase me, but what I built didn't need their permission to last."